Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov's chess channel and welcome to the Tata Steel Masters tournament in 2020. We're now in the round 8 and in this round I think really incredible things happened. First, we're starting this round 8 with a great match game between Pentala Harikrishna against Alireza Firouzja. Alireza played, I think, so far really great tournament. He lost the first game, as I mentioned, against Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces, but then he had 3 wins and only a couple of draws. He played basically his chess. He played his most attractive chess. His attacking style is really great to watch, and I've mentioned it also in my previous analyzed game played by Alireza Firouzja that basically I'm following what Alireza is doing. Usually I used to follow really Magnus Carlsen, but now in my opinion Alireza is playing much more attractive games. He's playing these sharp games which we really love to see, and the most important thing is that his sharp games are not inaccurate. That's the most important thing, because we can see sometimes a great attacker but he plays, I think, some aggressive lines which are not correct. Alireza Firouzja, on the other hand, his sharp lines are correct, and the most important thing is that this is probably what he's choosing here, some kind of a home preparation. I think he has a great preparation when it comes to openings. He's playing some lines that have never been played in chess history, which is also good. Theoretical novelties are also important because they can help us. We can maybe learn something, and I think Alireza Firouzja with the white pieces proved himself. For instance, in the London system we have seen also some great theoretical novelties by Alireza, and we all know that Alireza is only 17 years old, so he still has time to improve, and that's why I think he's really in the near future maybe even a world championship challenger. So let's check out now the game. Here Harikrishna opened with the move d4, d5 by Alireza, c4, and now Alireza goes into the Slav defense with c6. He plays so far a firm opening here. After c takes d5 we have c takes d5, and we have now the exchange variation of the Slav defense. And whenever we see this kind of a pawn structure, the symmetrical pawn structure, we're evaluating our bishop strength. What black doesn't want to do is of course get your bishop locked with potential e6 moves. White doesn't want to also play something like e3 to lock his bishop, so that's why here bishop to f4, and we have now knight to c6 by Alireza. We have e3 by Harikrishna, and now Alireza plays the move bishop to f5 because it's very risky. As I said, if you play first the move e6, then you don't know where to go with your bishop. If you play b6, then again bishop to b7 could be played, but then this pawn is blocking out your bishop. So far good activity by both sides. So we have now bishop to b5 by Harikrishna. What he's trying here to do is to get some kind of weakness. Queen to a5 doesn't bring you so much. Knight to c3 can be played. We're developing another piece. So here Alireza Firouzja played the move e6, and you may think that this could be a good move, maybe bishop to c6, b takes c6, but the problem is now when you go into such exchanges, and of course we can notice now that black is here weakness, it's the backward pawn, but when you're creating a backward pawn, then you want to secure that this backward pawn will get fixed. So in order to fix this backward pawn, you would have to play a blockade, something like knight to c3, knight to a4, and then knight to c5. But it's a long run. I think black can play in a couple of moves c5 immediately, and he'll get rid of his backward pawn. So that's why it's very important to secure when you're creating maybe some weaknesses in your opponent's position, to secure the weakness through the whole game. So that's why after bishop takes c6 you gain anything, and that's why here after the move e6 Harikrishna played simply the move knight to c3, and now comes knight to e7. This position has been played one time in chess history. I see only one game in a database, but still it was maybe not in this elite top grandmaster level. Knight to e7, very pragmatic idea, because now after potential bishop takes c6, knight takes c6, and we don't risk anymore this backward pawn, because with the move knight to c3 Harikrishna could maybe play, as I said, knight to a4, and then maybe something like rook to c1 and cement his knight on a very active square. So that's why Harikrishna goes now rook to c1, preparing maybe again knight to a5, knight to c5 ideas, and here Alireza simply kicks away the bishop to e2, and now f6. This move is really great. It's an obvious preparation of the move e5. What Harikrishna did here is of course good. He kicked away the bishop with the move bishop g4. The bishop has now to retreat, bishop to g6, and now knight to f3. Maybe here h4 should be played immediately, because obviously with this setup knight to e7 and bishop to f5, f6, Alireza wanted to create some dynamics because this is really a symmetrical pawn structure, and not so many things can happen in symmetrical pawn structure. So that's why I think it's time here to play really active. H4 maybe a slightly better idea. After E5, maybe H5 counter-attacking here somehow. This could be maybe a good line for Harikrishna, but he played more passive move, I think, knight to f3, although it seems like a natural move. We're developing the knight, but as I said, it's not time here to develop any more the minor pieces. It's time to strike, and here you see with the move bishop to f7, Alireza has secured his bishop, and now after bishop to g3, now h5 by Alireza, he realizes that he has some kind of an activity here. What we can do, for of course we can take g takes h5, but it's not so good, and again you're inviting your opponent's bishop into the game. So that's why knight here g5 was played by Harikrishna, and now Alireza goes knight to g6. Here, it's unbelievable that the suggested line by the engine is the move h4. You can really create your madness on the king side even further. Here, h4, after knight to h4, we have f takes g5. This wasn't played in the game, but of course it's much easier for me to analyze this game with the stockfish engine. But it's really, really interesting line. F takes g5, here after knight to f3, knight to f5, and we could then proceed even with the move g4. Really, really wild stuff that already is possible here in this kind of a pawn structure. As I said, we had this symmetrical pawn structure. Now really some great things could have happened, but knight to g6 is also not the problem. But still, again, Harikrishna should have played this move h4. After bishop to d6, we can play maybe something like g takes f6. Now after g takes f6, rook to g1, and I think white and black are not going to castle anymore. I don't think that Alireza is going to castle also here on the king side, because the rook is of course very dangerous here, and you don't want to again also castle here on the queen side, because this rook is also targeting this file. So that's why it will be probably from this point on a game in which both kings will stay in the center. But as I said, maybe h4 slightly better here, but in the game Harikrishna played the move g takes f6, and Alireza goes now with the move h4, which we have suggested earlier. After move h4, you see the bishop is hanging. We have f takes g7, another problem, bishop to g7. But here I think this is really part of Alireza's preparation at home. After bishop to g7, the bishop has only one square. Bishop to f4 is not good. Then you get knight takes f4, and after e takes f4, we can notice now that there are 4 pawn islands, and these pawns will be really an object of black's attack through the whole game. You cannot protect, I think, everything. We can play afterwards then something like queen to c7, queen to b6, here targeting a new weakness in the position. So I think this pawn structure would be really something bad here for white. So that's why bishop to e5, you have to give up now your bishop pair in an early stage of the game. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5. What the most important thing is that Alireza has his pawn back. He's not lacking in pawns here. After the knight to d4, here Alireza goes now rook to c8, bringing the last piece into the game. Very important to use all of your pieces. Now we want to again challenge the knight. If you play here again knight to c6 immediately, that's what I meant. This could be a problem. After knight takes c6, b takes c6, then maybe king to f1 or even castling, and then again knight to a4, knight to c5, rook to c8 wouldn't be a possibility because your pawn is hanging. So here in this particular case, I think black could be the one with some weaknesses when it comes to pawns, weak c6 pawn and also weak a6 pawn. So that's why here after move knight to d4, Alireza is preparing the move knight to c6 first with the move rook to c8, and now comes kingside castling, knight to c6, and now bishop to g4. Okay, what we can also notice is that Alireza has this weakness. It's the pawn on e6. The bishop is defending this pawn, but here still Alireza goes simply knight takes d4, which is, I think, a great move. It was really one of the decisive moments, I think, in this game. Knight takes d4. After e takes d4, we have now a really isolated pawn, which is also a weakness. And now with bishop to d4 and maybe something like queen to b6, maybe with some other attacking possibilities, we can attack this pawn, even rook to c4 in long terms, of course, not maybe immediately, but as a long-term plan is a possibility. What you have to do is, of course, also to protect your pawn on e6, but still when I play maybe with my bishops in many games against maybe a bishop and a knight, you have to always notice that the bishop is not only a good attacking piece, it's also a great defensive piece in front of the king. So you see these bishops are defending the king very well, but they're also creating some attacking possibilities with e5, and then this bishop can come very active into the game, and maybe here target the h2 pawn. So here rook to c6. First, Alireza protects his pawn. He wants to play maybe more freely with his bishop, with his light square bishop. We have knight to e2. We have h3 by Alireza, really wild move. He's locking now white's king. Here we have even as a long-term plan also some checkmate threats if the queen comes somehow here, maybe queen to g5. Here rook to c3 was played by Harikrishna, and now after rook to h4 we have rook to g3, and it seems now that Harikrishna has defended this position. He has now a nice protective setup here in front of the king. The rook is a very nice defensive piece. This bishop still cannot come into the game. This pawn is now very important. If bishop to e5 happens, then I think white could be in serious troubles. Here queen to c7, rook to e1, attacking of course the e6 indirectly so far, but again, as a long-term plan, this idea to simply attack the pawn on e6 could be also a nice possibility for white. So king to f8, Alireza gets out of the range. He hasn't castled, but as we said, the bishops are not only attacking pieces, they are also good defensive pieces. Round of the king, we have king to f8, queen to d3, and now comes e5. This is now a breakthrough. This is how you should play with your bishops. The bishops cannot tolerate closed and positional setups. So now it's time to open the position for the bishops. The bishops will find now good ways into the game. Although the engine evaluation here is about equal, but it's not the point. I think when you face a great attacker like Alireza Firouzja, then you don't want to get this kind of a position where the bishops will find, as I said, a way into the game where the bishops will find good squares on the board, where still many weaknesses can happen. And if you lose maybe one pawn in these types of positions, you get crushed, because it's all about now pawns, it's all about king's activity. Really a wild game. So queen to a3, queen to d6. Alireza doesn't mind here to trade off the queens. He wants a simplification, because the only piece that can maybe harm the king is really the queen, and he gets really rid of the best piece of whites after queen to d6, rook to d6. Basically this move order helps out Alireza Firouzja. He has now simplified line, but it's not a problem here. After bishop to h3, Alireza takes now also this pawn. We have now really a pass pawn situation, very important. d3 can happen, d2, then this one, d3, maybe with even a piece pawn sacrifice, but this bishop has to come now into the game. And here Harikrishna played the move knight to c1, and we're going to stop now. And what we can notice now, this pawn here on h2 cannot be protected anymore, because here Alireza plays now the move rook to h6. The bishop is attacked twice. You have to retreat bishop to g2, and now Alireza has his pawn back. But I prepared here something. I think from this point on, what white would love to create here is some kind of a position like this. So this is something I think that white is searching here in order to make it raw, because obviously here black is maybe slightly better. So what we are trying to do is get rid of all of these rooks maybe and go into the opposite color bishop's endgame. So it means maybe black is continuing the game with the dark square bishop, but we're continuing the game with the light square bishop. Although maybe in this scenario black is a pawn up, but here this would be a perfect draw. So that's why this is a setup that white is searching for. Black is searching for complications now. Alireza doesn't want to go into this simplified lines. He wants now to create further dynamics, because he has now the bishop pair. He has now great activity on the h file with the rooks. We have knight to d3. We're blocking out the pass pawn. Very important also idea by Harikrishna. He wants to create a blockade, never allow this pawn to roll, because if this pawn moves, then this bishop could come maybe here on this very active square. So that's why the blockade idea so far is a good idea. And by Harikrishna, we have rook to h5, f4, rook to c6. You see how Alireza is playing now with the pieces all over the board. Here in the game, instead of this f4 move, this was, I think, also sort of a critical moment of the game. Maybe knight to c5, really the only way to defend this position, although you're leaving your blockade idea. But here after maybe a5, You cannot really take knight to b7, then bishop to e5 will happen. Then we have really some troubles. But here maybe after the move a5, knight to d7 is really one of the best ways, and after something like king to g7, now knight to e5 can happen. And as we said, maybe here to trade off the bishops is really a great idea, and then trying maybe something like bishop to f1 and then bishop to d3. Again, you have some problems here on the h file, but as we said, this is our goal. This is what we want to create here from White's perspective. We want to create some kind of a drawish setup, but the only way, as I said, knight to c5 is the only maybe opportunity here for Harikrishna to make a draw, but he played now mistake sort of. It's the move f4. He opens the position in front of the king even further. You see this pawn is not protecting the king anymore. The bishop will come into the game. The bishop can attack the king with the move bishop to d4, and now the knight is really out of game, because if this knight moves, we'll simply play the move d3 and then get our bishop to d4, and then with this bishop's activity, White is, as I said, in serious trouble. So rook to c6, we have bishop to f3 attacking the rook to h6, getting these rooks again connected. The rook connection in such open positions is also very important, because you don't want to have loose pieces. You see everything is glued together here by Alireza. The pieces are playing in beautiful harmony here. Rook to g2, rook to g6, and now f5, we have rook to h6, and now knight to f4. And this is what we said. When the knight leaves the protection of the blockade, it's time to push the pawn. It's even playable, of course, because we're sacrificing a pawn, but it's now all about piece activity. If you take here bishop to d5, it's not a problem. You get bishop to d4. You see how these bishops now come very active into the game. If you try king to f1, if you don't want to loot decisive material with rook to f1, rook to f2 and similar stuff, king to f1, then rook to h1, it leads into checkmate. So here, even if you try to take out with knight to d5, again bishop to d5 first, we're getting rid of the defender of the star squares. It's of course the knight. After bishop to d5, again the same idea, bishop to d4, rook king to f1, and rook to h1. Here rook to f2 leads, as I said, into complications again for White. So after the move knight to f4, d3, knight takes d3, and now bishop to d4, knight to f2 has to be played, but now rook to c2. This is the position that Alireza is searching for, and his piece is now really active. This bishop can also come into the game in the near future. In the game, king to f1 was played. Now Alireza takes a decisive pawn, and again, what White is searching for here is maybe this kind of a pawn structure, where if we see this, maybe we want to get rid of this this pawn somehow, maybe trade off more pieces and going into blockade idea to block this pass pawn on the d file somehow, and maybe going into a situation where black has maybe 2 versus 1, but again with some opposite colored bishops. The opposite colored bishops endgame is the only way to protect his this position for White's perspective. It's the only way to make a draw, but here in the game, Alireza is not allowing again this kind of scenario. He plays after rook to e2, rook to b1, rook to e1, and now rook to b6, improving simply the position of his rooks. Again, he's connecting the rooks. Everything is again glued together. Bishop is protecting rook, rook is protecting rook. So far a great attacking setup. So we have knight to d3, bishop to c3 attacking the rook, and now after trades of rooks, king to e7. The king has now to play also in an endgame. The king has to be now used as an attacking piece, not something that you need to defend. The king is a very active piece in an endgame. Rook to e3, king to e3, king to g5, knight to c5, attacking at least some kind of a pawn, but rook to b5, counter attack here, and after rook to h7, you see again. That's what I meant. Rook to c5, rook takes f7, leads again into this opposite color bishop's endgame, where we could maybe create a blockade with the move king to d3, attacking also this pawn. Black has to react first. Maybe this could be a draw, although black is up a pawn, but this opposite color bishop's endgames are really complicated. So here after the move rook to h7, Alireza is not trading off more pieces. He's again complicating things with bishop to g8, rook to c7, and now king to to f5, knight takes b7. Okay, it's a pawn, but it's simply too late. This pawn is rolling. We have now d4, king to f2, and now rook to b2, attacking the king, bishop to e2. Even if you try here in this particular position, if you try king to d3, it is maybe slightly better, but it's not helping you out. You have only two choices, king to d3 or king to f2. Both choices are bad. It's like the presidential selection in USA. Both selections are bad, so king to d3 doesn't help you out. So if you even try to get your king here, then you're vulnerable to this attack. Rook to b2, knight to d6, then maybe the king can come very active into the game. Even if you try knight to e4 to create some kind of a defensive setup, we can simply take knight takes c3 here, d takes c3, and again you maybe can take out this pawn, but after rook to a2, I think the game is over. We have everything protected, and this pawn, pass pawn, is simply too much to handle here for white. But in the game, let's go back. As I said, after move rook to d4, king to f2, but now rook to b2, bishop to e2, and now king to f4. Very important move to get again this king into an opposition position. And now rook to f7 is not a possibility because the rook is covering, the bishop is covering the very important f7 square. We have knight to d6, and now bishop to d2. We have king to f1, and now after this check, basically it's game over, because here after bishop to d1 we have d3, and in this position Harikrishna resigned. So the problem is now, if you go somewhere here like king to g2, this bishop will come also very active in the game. We can take out this bishop, and you risk also some checkmates here around the square h1, so it's simply bad position. So after the move d3, as we said, Harikrishna resigned. So great game by Alireza Firouzja. I don't want to reveal the other results. I'm covering one more game, the game by Magnus Carlsen. You probably know the outcome of the Magnus Carlsen game, but still I wanted to cover it today. Then we'll talk about also some current standings. After this game, Alireza took the lead. That's the most important thing, with the half of the point in front of the followers. He is playing really great. He's playing such active chess. You saw in the beginning it was an exchange Slav variation where the pawn structure is really symmetrical, where it's really hard to create dynamics. But this style of Alireza we should really appreciate, because he's trying to play attractive. He's trying to see attacking possibilities. He's playing imbalanced pawn structures. He's playing imbalanced positions. Pieces are dancing all over the board. Really beautiful chess, and it's also a refreshment, I think, because we have seen many times positional struggles, especially in this classical time format, and Alireza is really a refreshment. And as I said, when I follow some tournaments, I'm first watching what's Alireza doing, then I'm watching the other players, what they are doing. So okay, a great game by the young prodigy. If you want to see more games from this tournament, check out my coverage so far. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe the computers battling in their best chess games, check out my commented chess games played by computer series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.